Welcome everyone to Swedenborgian Online Community's weekly Thursday discussion and chat. Today we are greatly honored by our guest, Dr. Joy Barnitz, who has made the astounding, magnificent journey from laboratories to the boardroom to spiritual practice and spiritual service in her many ways. So let's open our hearts and minds to Dr. Joy's wisdom and greet her lovingly. Thanks, Joy, for coming on and connecting with us.
I'm doing fine, Cory, and hi to the community. Some of you may remember me. I used to call into this occasionally.
That's awesome. Yeah, so you'd participate in some of our reflections, discussions, services?
Yeah, I sometimes was on the services on Sunday night and sometimes on the Thursdays, depending on the topic, the speaker.
Well, that's excellent. Well, we're happy to have you back on and sharing your perspective, hopefully yet again. Have you been on? Have you been interviewed before? I think I know the answer.
Not really.
I've seen your reflections online, but they were text.
Yes. Reverend Wilma would occasionally ask me if I would want to come on when I became a labyrinth facilitator, and we just never made it happen.
I see. Well, we are happy to finally have you on then, and I want to invite anyone listening live to join the conversation. Feel free to call in at 646-564-9571, and if you're on our website, swedenborgiancommunity.org, you can actually share your thoughts via text on our worship page. And greetings to everyone there. How are you this evening? Let us know how the divine is treating you, your higher power is working in your life this week. It's always nice to connect with you, even when we have kind of a showcase guest. But yes, again, Joy, I want to start by just asking you, where are you and what's going on in your life? What's your main line of work, if I may be so bold?
You may. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I live closer to San Jose than to either Oakland or San Francisco. And I continue to do some consulting work for a client that is working in what's known as regenerative medicine, managing a governmental grant using stem cell technology. It's a very part-time occupation, and the rest of the time I'm active in interfaith work and in working very active in my local church, which is now Discovery Church in Fremont, California.
Discovery Church. What's the background, the theology of that church, if I can ask that too?
You may. So as people who've known me will recognize, I grew up as a Swedenborgian, first in the general church, and as I often said, I was the adopted child of a mixed marriage. My father was general church, my mom was convention. So when I moved out to the Bay Area about 20 years ago, we were able to attend occasionally, and eventually I became fairly engaged in the San Francisco church and reasonably involved also in the Hillside community. So I have some experience in the Swedenborgian community. Around the time of the 2016 election, I found myself, since I live in a community that has the most Muslims in the Bay Area and probably one of the highest concentrations in the United States, and I live in a congressional district that is over 50% Asian. So I live in a community that speaks 150-some languages and dialects of every faith tradition, from Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, and every flavor of Christian, and probably a number of things I don't know and can't identify. So
wow.
I had something that really spoke to me as I finished seminary was that I should grow where I'm planted in this area, which is diverse, and the urgency of that hit, particularly at the time after the 2016 election, because with some of the changes in priorities for the administration, my neighbors started to be people who might be threatened. So I reached out to the interfaith community, and from there found this highly active church that is the merger of two churches about 10 miles away from me. Niles Discovery Church is a United Church of Christ and Disciples of Christ dually aligned church, which makes me a member, since I'm a member of the Pacific Coast Association of the Swedenborgian Church. I'm a member of 3 Christian denominations.
Oh, wonderful. I'm curious about how that intersection works for you. I know you grew up Swedenborgian, and how would you say that informs your work with this church, which is a member of 2 other denominations?
Well, as many people know, Swedenborgian theology really teaches that anyone who desires to be good can find their way to God and will find their way to heaven or a heavenly community. So I actually come from a more less reformed Christianity background, more like many of the people who have aligned with this church but were not brought up as either Congregationalist or Disciples of Christ members. So it blends in, and I find my theology blends well, and I find that as a result of attending seminary, I now have vocabulary to transfer my very Swedenborgian thinking process and terminology to Christian terms that can be appreciated and received by people who've grown up in more traditional Christian faith.
Well, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. And it sounds like you're happy in this church and feel called to your work. What's that like for you? Your daily or weekly work with that church?
So, the church, as a member of the church, I sing in the choir. So that's twice a week, once on Sunday morning, once on singing on rehearsal, actually later tonight. And I'm an offshoot of a local semi-professional choir, meets on Tuesdays. So I sing with a group that learns by rote and sings songs from all around the world, which I find tremendously spiritual and grounding for me. I missed singing, and one of the things I love about House Discovery Church is that the pastors are both singers, and so music and song is deftly interwoven into worship services and all other services. So I really appreciate that on the receiving end, because I don't have to be in charge of it. I get to be
nice.
part of the chorus and an instrument that is contributing to the worship space in my role as a choir member, which I really appreciate. And those who have met me at convention will know that I almost always joined the pop-up choir at convention, which I had so much fun in that I really missed when I wasn't there. So that's part of what I do.
That's wonderful. And yeah, it's nice for someone so active when you can get, don't have to lead it or you can just kind of join in. What a blessing.
And as Cory can tell, I'm nodding for those of you who can't see at the moment. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. In addition, I usually spend some time in daily reflection. Sometimes that occurs while I'm scruffing one of my cats. And in addition to that, I'm active in planning events through the local Interfaith Council. And right now I'm part of a team that is planning for a Holocaust Remembrance Day celebration, which is early in May, and is a very, very moving service that takes place at the local synagogue. It is the only interfaith Holocaust Remembrance Day celebration in the Bay Areas, and it has been like that for over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So we're actually
quite
the pioneer in this area in interfaith communications and services, and trying to bring people together, which I really appreciate, because it means that I have friends who are Muslim and friends who are of a variety of other flavor, and sometimes we just come together and sing in a chorus for one of these services, which is lots of fun.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, it sounds like it's quite the hub of interfaith work and outreach in different ways. You are, in general. I'm curious about your interfaith work and that organization. Tell us a little bit about what you all do.
So the council is made up of people from a number of faiths who self-select, and it has been going on. It used to be an outgrowth of a Protestant clergy group that expanded to include Catholics and then the Jewish rabbi, and then more recently reached out to the Muslim community and to other faith communities. We get major participation in an annual Thanksgiving service where members from almost every faith tradition participate in the program, giving thanks that we're in a community together that is rich and multicultural, multi-faith, and that is, my hope is that we can, this area as a light into the world of what can be, that people are people and can live together, and that at root compassion and love are central to all faith traditions. And that's certainly consistent with my understanding of Emanuel Swedenborg's things.
Yeah, I think that's right on. It's really wonderful to connect with people in ministry in their lives, or doing their part, even if it's just through walking around the world, doing work and being in connection, being open to other faiths and other people and their views, and let alone someone who's working so closely with these groups, which are trying to kind of uplift this more pluralistic attitude and connect with people, uplift them wherever they're at, without necessarily trying to, convert them or badger them with theology, perhaps.
Yes, and we do not proselytize or badger. Right. One of the things that the Interfaith Council and the cities that that are represented on the Interfaith Council, one of the things we've done is sponsor several what are called bystander intervention trainings, which is if you were on a public transit or you were shopping and somebody was being harassed and called names because they were wearing hijab or wearing some other or a different colored skin, etc. It's a way of not feeling disempowered, stepping to the aid of the person being harassed without hopefully antagonizing the harasser situation in a way that allows people to continue on without any. So the last one that we had was part of a Bay Area United Against Hate, and it was held taught by a group from the local Islamic society held in the Jewish synagogue. So that and was very well attended. So, and it was the members of the city, several city governments were there as well. So,
fantastic. Maybe you can inspire me and others to do more of that work. It's beautiful that people of different faiths coming together in peace and support. That's great.
Well, I think so. I also think it's kind of fun that there are people from the religious science community and from a couple of other New Thought movements who forget that Swedenborg, when they first heard that I was from Swedenborgian tradition, kind of looked at me like, really? There is such a thing? I've never met one of you. And so I every now and then they will be talking and I go, oh, that's right. Because New Thought, of course, is one of the many, is a collective term from many of the wealth of religious movements that were inspired by some aspect of Emerson or Swedenborg or Blake's writings.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It is. I mean, I think it is surprising when we run into folks willing to break down those barriers, and of course, any type of sect or small group. I think when you're interacting with someone like me, for example, also Swedenborgian, it's like, oh, it's just you're so strange. You're not what I'm used to. And I know growing up with Swedenborgianism in my life, that's how I always felt towards it, because I wasn't Swedenborgian as a kid, but my father was a huge fan of Swedenborg, and I'm curious, your family. So your family was into Swedenborg. How did that blossom, and what's the root of that?
So my mother was a TOEFL on both sides of her family. So was in the living rooms of some of her ancestors that the split between convention and the general church occurred. So her roots go all the way back to the beginning of convention. And my dad grew up in the intentional community, and I don't know Glenview. I don't know how they ended up part of that. I don't remember the lineage, but I had cousins that were in that community as well. So it was in both sides of the family, and
wow.
I went to the general church school until I was through 8th grade. I went to a public high school and to college, graduate school. And I always intended to go back to philosophy, having majored in biology and chemistry and studied science for my doctorate. But I always intended to go back to philosophy. And about 10 years later than I had originally estimated, went to seminary, which was kind of philosophy.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I know that there's a number of people listening with kind of Swedenborgian roots in all their various ways. And I invite you to, if you're listening, please share how you got in connection with us here at Swedenborgian Community Online. And I want to take a moment to connect with some of you live. Albert in the chat says he's also a annual convention choir member, just like you are, Joy. So you probably have had some nice time with him.
I know Albert from this community years ago. So hi, Albert.
That's great. And Ward and Bill are also in the chat greeting us this evening. I'm curious how you all are doing, how Divinity is speaking to you and in your walks today. And the rest of you, too, joining us there and joining us otherwise, please send us a message anytime at Swedenborgian Community Online, our website, or email, Facebook, Instagram, and we want to hear from you. We want to be able to uplift your spirit, which takes a little bit of getting to know you and sharing. And be sure to subscribe as well if you're joining us on YouTube. So yeah, welcome. If it's your first time, we're happy to have you, and as we are happy to have Joy. Now, Joy, how did you end up really leaning into or focusing on the interfaith aspect of your work and being inspired in so many ways as you are musically? And what were you doing before all this ministry, and what happened?
So I can speak to that a little bit. One of the turning points for me was in seminary, when one of the people who came to seminary to recover from her family's brand of Christianity, and when she found out I was Swedenborgian, she said, "Oh, you guys are cool. You have correspondences. You get it." It was the first time in my life I'd ever felt cool for being Swedenborgian. And I've always cherished that as I've met other people, because one of the most common things I hear in church and in volunteer work in hospitals or listening to people in other settings is, I don't go to church because I just, and there's usually a story, and then they'll go, and I go for walks in nature. And I'm still developing language to say, well, that's a different form of church. And that's a place to talk to God as well. And most people get that immediately. So some way that'll open conversations with a number of people. And even people who are very diligent church members will often say, but to really recover, I go for a walk. Dogs.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate that too, what you're uplifting around, like correspondences and God speaking to us through nature. In fact, the people who are regular listeners probably have heard my dog multiple times, either making strange noises or shaking or what have you. She's my inspiration to get outside most of the time, but I think it's uplifting. Do you find it peaceful? Is it a key place for spiritual practice for you?
It is always a source of wonder, because out here we have so many microclimates, as you know, having studied at PSR, Cory. There's always a change in lighting. There's always a change in temperature, and the season. There actually are seasons here, so there's almost always something, if I go for a walk, that connects me to, isn't that beautiful? And it can just be a small flower. It can be a cat hunting in an open field. It can be watching the wild turkeys, stroll across a suburban street. It can be lots of things that just, make me aware of the magnificence of creation, and that reminds me that the divine is in everything, from the largest to the smallest, and completely present in all of those. And that's something I've found I can say to people who know nothing about Swedenborg. And I usually just say, I come from a tradition that says that the divine is present completely in everything in the universe, smallest subatomic particle to the largest galaxy and is even more than that. And people go, oh, yeah, I can do that.
Well, I think you brought us to the lead here, which we buried, and Ward is also asking about this around your background in science and also your work in spirituality, how those things come together, and how does that inform your living? And I think we got a hint of it just a moment ago.
So thank you for the question, Ward, and for relaying it, Cory. Probably Probably the best thing to say is I didn't realize until I was in my 50s that a good part of the reason I had been able to be resilient in response to being laid off or having to move and change careers and continue to develop and finding my own way, it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I really realized that was rooted in my sense that when I was 8, wished I had been adopted into a Catholic family because it would have been more straightforward how to follow the rules, and I might not have had to think for myself as much. I decided I have relished the fact that I had to think through and form my own relationship with the divine, and so as a consequence, I've been able to bounce back from layoffs or career setbacks or other handicaps in volunteer activities where things haven't gone quite the way one intended. And it's helped me work on my patience, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet. And, that often that comes down to your family, whether you're Catholic, Swedenborgian, or Muslim, whether or not you're getting pigeonholed. And it's so, or, people often try just in, even at work, right? We often feel like that. Did you feel anything like that in your scientific work before you kind of moved into this other ministry?
Well, so as a kid in General Church School in Glenview, the science courses were pretty superficial even for those days. But one thing that was covered in one of the expressions that I've held on to from that time was from a minister who was trying to explain how the natural world worked, and his phrasing was that science is the study of the laws of order by which God governs the universe. And I held on to that, and then when I was in seminary and conversing with George Dole on occasion, we were talking about how the term elegance gets used for a mathematical formula in physics for a formulation so that a pharmaceutical ingredient is delivered effectively to treat a disease. That term elegance is a beauty recognition, not a analytical. And George Dole's comment was the phrasing about science being the study of the laws of order by which God governs the universe. He said the Latin for that could probably be translated as science is the study of God's elegant design of creation. And I thought that was really a beautiful, for me, that was an opening up and a realization that the creative artistic part was enabled just as the analytical study and mapping and understanding. So it was really a creative expression as well as a structured framework. And for me, that made a huge change in how I looked at thought about things that had happened to me and that I encounter in my consulting work, because scientists are creative in very different ways depending on where their background is. So it's helped me to really see the creativity each person brings to their discovering their purpose in life. And I'm extraordinarily fond of the heaven and hell quote that was on a Swedenborgian House of Studies bookmark, that are formed for heaven by our lives and the world, from heaven and hell. And that rooting of trying to relate to other people by saying, what are they offering? What makes them excited? What are they trying to discover about their dominant loves and express that in the world, has been incredibly helpful in terms of looking at people who otherwise might be challenging. I don't say I get it all right, but it's actually a daily practice of how to use faith into action by looking at what other people respond well to and how what I'm called to do might fit well with them in a particular situation. Or if it doesn't, to be respectful and supportive of them on their path.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, and Ward likes it too, he says. He appreciates the answer.
Thank you, Ward. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Ward, for uncovering that for us. Beautiful. Please, if you all have any other questions, I want to say we have a new setup here tonight. So you don't know it if you're listening, but Joy and I are talking on Zoom. So we get to see Joy talk back, which is a new thing in our interview series. And, give thanks, because that means my connection's strong enough, have a new router and things like that. And I have to rejoice in that regard. Joy, what are you rejoicing nowadays? What's a key bloom of gratitude in your life?
There's actually a lot. I recently went on a retreat and looking at emotions as expressed through the Catholic Saint Francis, because it was being offered by a good friend and a favorite prof of mine. And I found myself in a conversation where somebody said, so what do you do as as your spiritual practice to keep grounded? And I said, well, I sing 3 times a week. I try to go to dance chapel once a week, which allows me to move and pray with others using Interplay technique. And I do writing, and I work on some analytical projects. And I said, basically, there's always something I can turn to feel like I'm contributing and that my background is useful and I have a place to grow, and to also offer my perspective as someone who is a Swedenborgian Christian, distinct from some of the other paths. And we all learn from that.
That's wonderful. It's nice to hear that divine embodiment in your living in multiple ways. You mentioned Interplay. Can you tell us a little bit about Interplay?
So Interplay is literally designed for adults who forgot how to play, to just create a safe space where people can move and make sounds and release tension and dance on behalf of others. So there's the dance chapel I attend actually uses Zoom. It's online, and it's led by a trained leader. And we do warm-ups, we set intentions, and then we move through a time where we dance on behalf of one other or several other people, which simply means that someone makes a request and someone else holds that request and moves, however they are called to move, and make sounds or not. And it's incredibly touching because it lets, at least for me, my experience is that if I connect with the other person, even through this modality of I have been brought to tears while dancing, because thinking about that other person's request, feeling the connection to my own history, and then expressing it some way connects all of me. For me, that's important, part because it's kinesthetic learning. The other is there's musical background to it, which is enormously helpful for me.
That's excellent. Yeah, I a key way that I connect with God is through music and the sound of music, and it sounds like you have that on multiple levels. How does that embolden your spirit? Do you feel like, I think about music and I think about how, I've been trying to pin down, like, what is it so special? Why is music so special? And often I think, okay, music is almost like a characterization of affection. And it seems to draw along your heart, maybe as long as your mind. And often when we hear music, we're interpreting it more metaphorically as well. And so it's almost like scripture in that sense, as the Christian Gospels say, Christ always spoke in parable. And when you hear a song, I think you can't help but often take it as parable, right? What do you think about what makes music so powerful?
So the things we call art, so music and visual art, poetry and dance, etc., are all things that cut through the divide between analytical and experiential. And it's been pretty well demonstrated that music bypasses the thought centers in a way that connects directly to your emotions and your gut, and then that informs your thinking. So it unifies our brains. And it will cut through to it. So we know that people will remember songs even when they can't remember the faces of their children. They'll remember songs from their youth, and they can respond to music. So it's and I've never met a kid who couldn't dance and beat percussive songs. I think it's one of the most integrative things, and from that we can dance, we can draw pictures. These are all sort of core human activities. And I would say that I got introduced to Interplay when I was working with Sanctuary for the Arts, which was founded by two people with theological training who were Interplay leaders, and used Interplay as a way to have individuals explore scripture passages. We also did drawings as prayers and as scripture interpretations, and we also did labyrinth walks at times. So that was one of the things I led in that group, was labyrinth walks where we did not follow all the lines, we danced across them.
That's great.
So,
I'm curious.
So Sanctuary for the Arts was really very formative for me between about 2014 and 2017, when we were regularly meeting or working to extend it with other people. So I've worked with one of the co-founders to create as part of a worship for a retreat. Free worship we used Interplay as part of that. So it's adaptable to being silly, babbling, or being very profound and exploring, connecting with your feelings when you're reading scripture. And as we all know, there's some really strange things in the Bible. And so sometimes it's a really interesting thing to think about one of those.
Well, that's clever. I'm feeling invited to maybe put you on the spot, and feel free to decline. But we can see each other. Perhaps we could do some type of, and maybe we don't need to be able to see each other, and invite everyone to join in. Perhaps we could do a little pseudo interplay right now. Is that something you'd be willing to lead? I have a Bible right here if you want me to flip it open and see what pops out. I would suggest
do it as just a breath prayer with some movement, if that works for you. That way we don't have to look anything up.
Wonderful. Yeah. Would you lead us in that?
Thank you for the invitation, Cory, and welcome to all who are on this call. I invite you to breathe in deeply. And let your breath out slowly and completely, and blow the last of it out and make a sound. And do it again. And now we'll do a small hand dance. So pick up whichever hand speaks to you, or not. You don't have to actually do it. You can do this in your imagination. And move your hand in a sort of a flowing way. And feel how that feels. Now stop. And quickly change what your hand looks like. Change it again. And change it again. Then push away. Push. Push. And now just let your hand fall and rest. And breathe and let it, and breathe and let it go. So there are 4 shapes, 4 elements that I tried to bring into that. A flowing, sort of letting things just go, letting them hang, a particular shape that you made and held, and then a push or a thrust. Those are useful not just as a hand dance, though that can be sometimes all I feel like doing, but it's useful in not just in getting things out of your body, which is what Interplay uses them for in warm-up, but also in if you need to be more expressive in a controlled way and you need to develop the sort of driver capacity where you put on your leader's voice and you are compassionate and leaderly, but you also are firm. And if that's not your normal state, you can practice it by actually pushing with your body. That when you go through that kind of exercise, you often find that you are more grounded and you feel like you can do things differently. So I had not thought of that till I took an Interplay class on moving as a way of getting yourself prepared to do something that might be hard. All on a different, like being patient. How can I flow into it, be accepting, be listening, be patient, and hear what somebody is actually saying. It can be used as a way to prepare for a setting.
Oh, what's great practice and practical advice for us. Something I want to make sure I remember to put into practice, because it seems like it would be helpful before doing anything nerve-wracking or maybe before a show like this for me.
And one of the things that when people talk about meditating, I often say, well, I'm too fidgety, which is why I do labyrinth walks. And I found a quote, and it's attributed to Augustine, but is almost certainly not Augustine's. Solvitur ambulado. It is solved by walking. And a typical experience for me walking a labyrinth is I walk in with a question or a openness and hoping for an answer to 1 or 2 questions. And what I usually walk out with is either a sense of no clear answer or answer to something I didn't know I was asking. So solving things by moving is sort of been how I've grown, starting in seminary. I danced as a little kid, but then I couldn't take lessons because we couldn't afford it, so I just had to dance by myself.
Oh, yeah. And I can see how that could even inspire more creativity in your dance. I know when I
I've
first
been
picked
known
up the
to
guitar.
dance in the laboratory when an experiment was working.
Oh, really? Wait, tell us about those experiments. What kind of things were you working on in your lab?
When I was the first molecular biologist ever hired by Eastman Kodak Company, and they had to build a small biotechnology program in order to support their clinical diagnostics tools, which were basically the diagnostic tests used instant film technology, and the instrument that read them used copier technology, and that's sort of the easiest way to phrase it. But get the kinds of the components for doing the diagnostic tests were not always easy to find or come by, so they started expanding into isolating components from novel bacteria from the soil. And eventually they built up a fairly extensive biotechnology program and then merged it with an offshoot of Genentech. And so that was my first merger acquisition and being moved into another company. And what I did was develop microorganisms that would grow in fermenters and produce the desired product stably and in an economical way. So I worked with chemical engineers, biochemists, and a variety of other people. Had many a time when Mother Nature did not agree with my approach, and so I didn't get what I thought I was going to get. So I had to be creative and try different approaches if I was going to solve the problem. So when it worked, it was worth dancing for, particularly on a Saturday afternoon.
Oh, wonderful. I know my partner would appreciate your focus on dance, and what you just described, though, is just sounds like its own type of dance, working in a lab, bringing all these things together, seeing what blooms and what doesn't. And it sounds like, you're the type of person that would look at a setting like that and what's going on and perhaps see something deeper. Was that kind of like, your walks through nature, your other type of connections with nature for you in terms of divinity, speaking through it?
So I need to go in a minute, but I'll give you this tidbit. When I was working at Kodak, I said that when I grew up, I wanted to teach a course on microbiology, microbial physiology, psychology, philosophy. Because one of my engineer colleagues said that you had talked about creating an environment in which the microorganism wanted to do what you wanted it to do. And so you created an environment in which it could easily produce the product rather than constraining its choices. I did genetic manipulations of microorganisms, and the question is, train it so it has no choices and you're forcing it to do something, or do you just make it easy to do the thing you want?
Huh.
It works a lot better if you can figure out how to make it easy. And
I love that.
he gave me a very small copy with elements of the Bhagavad Gita because I asked him, how on earth did you come up with this approach? And he said, well, it's very simple. If you give it what it wants, it will do what you want if you make it easy. And I thought that might be relevant to humans on teams, and it took me a long time to get around to really figuring that out, that yes, one can create that. People want to, so this is maybe my last piece of Swedenborgian ownership that I have, which is for today, which is people want to be useful, And when they're frustrated in team settings, it's usually because they don't feel heard, they don't feel they're using their highest purpose, and that what they're doing isn't feeding into their development and growth as a person. And if you can relate to that, open up the way for that to be done efficiently. So if there's a person who has to do it, but it's not terribly interesting, that they can participate, get it done, get rewarded, back on to something that gives them more reward. Or someone who needs tutoring, there's lots of ways to step to people's side, and that's my program manager side, which I find resonates with a lot of people who've done small group work over time. You have to, by identifying a purpose, aligning people around it, people bond pretty well. And that's because it serves their being of use. I don't tell them that, but I think that. How can I help this person feel useful in a way that feeds them and nourishes them? Don't get it right all the time. Still working on it.
Wow. Well, what words of wisdom, truly. I feel a call to action in my own spirit through your words. And, you can, if you have to disappear, please do, Joy. I don't mean to keep you longer than you need to, if you need to.
I have to go to choir rehearsal tonight because we're interviewing a new choir director, and I don't want to miss the beginning.
Oh, well, makes sense.
And
all right,
thank you all for being with. I look forward to hearing responses through Reverend Cory, and I'd be happy to join again some future time. Blessings on your journeys, all of you.
Well, you blessed us tonight. Blessings to you too, Joy. Bye, Dr.
Amen.
If you have questions or comments, I will get them to her, and we can continue this conversation beyond the bounds of today. And I do want to take a moment and reflect on what you said about, making people feel useful and heard. Please, if you have feedback, I hope to take it to heart. Please offer it willingly through any one of our portals. Even if I respond in one way, I will continue digesting, working on it, reflecting. I'm sure you don't want to hear every step that I take after something you share, but please do. It means a lot to me to hear what you think. And if you have ideas for how you can be useful to our wider community, please share that as well. Share if there's a certain space that you would feel more effective in, if it would connect with you more. Because as Dr. Joy so beautifully put in so many beautiful, wonderful ways, we are here for everyone, no matter their faith, hoping to uplift them, connect with them, empower divinity in their life. So before we close out, I want to take another second and just uplift you all thanking Joy right now. Joy, if you happen to watch this, they're really touched by what you said, inspired I am by your insights. I really hope to have Dr. Joy on again really soon, because that felt like part one, didn't it? So let's have her back. She can talk science and spirituality with us a little bit more, and we can explore her wisdom and her loving presence. I'll also share that Albert says he drew a labyrinth in the sand on an estate in Arizona. And he enjoyed the view of the clouds and mountains a lot while walking it. And there are times throughout walking that labyrinth to stop and look around and reflect in the labyrinth design. Wow, beautiful, Albert. I did add a couple words there. I apologize for that. But wonderful reflection. And that's another thing we have to touch on with Joy again, is labyrinth walking. I loved that she said she walks over the lines with her groups. I think that's inspiring in our own lives, whether it's labyrinth walking for spiritual practice, even finger labyrinths you can do slowly, as you might have seen on our website, Swedenborgiacommunity.org, or something else. Often we have these set lines and we think about it a certain way, and it can maybe slow our approach and limit our creativity, our own ideas around what those lines are. And what an inspiration from Dr. Barnitz to think about stepping over those lines from time to time. So again, thanks to her. Thank you all as well. And we'll take a few minutes and just touch base with the community. I'm curious how you all approach science and spirituality. She talked about Reverend Dr. George Dole and some of his insights around that. So I have to just uplift our book series on that. His most recent book, The Universe and I, Where Science and Spirituality Meet. It's our first one, so I was still kind of getting the hang of it. There's a lot of reading going on, not as much summarizing. But if you like that kind of thing, go look at them. You can find them in our podcasts. You can find them on YouTube, on Facebook. And also, she mentioned her favorite Heaven and Hell quotes. And of course, we just finished a book discussion on that. But what I really loved about her presence with us this evening is that spiritual practice, the moment to recenter, take a deep breath, and move and connect through movement. You know what? I'll probably start putting more and more of our guests on the spot and ask them to share a little bit more of their worship, a little bit more of their spiritual practice. Maybe I'll check with some beforehand. But who knows? As Reverend, or she's not a Reverend, but I should say she's minister, Dr. Joy Barnitz shared, we should step over some of our stringent thinking and just see where it takes us. Can lead to some beautiful spaces. And I see that you all are still chatting. I'll go ahead and close out this conversation for today. So as we close, I want to uplift this idea of science and spirituality and Swedenborg. Swedenborg was of the heartfelt conviction that in everything in creation, there was wisdom allowing for its structure and its blooming, from the smallest microscopic, even smaller, right, particles and how they interact and essentially compound to make greater and greater things, to our spirit and our living. And even though Swedenborg wrote in the 18th century, he had some amazing ideas around particle physics and things like that. If you look up, for example, nebular hypothesis on Wikipedia, which is how the solar system formed, you'll see that Swedenborg was the first in recorded history to write about it, as far as we know, before Kant and Laplace. He also wrote about neural theory and on and on. Actually, I could probably keep going. And so I think that that's beautiful, because to him it all came back to how divinity works in everyone's life, no matter their tradition or worldview, and how divinity wanted to uplift our hearts. That's imaged in creation. That's how creation is so powerful and so beautiful. So perhaps this week, employ Joy's spiritual practice every day if you can, whenever you remember. A little movement, a little interplay. Maybe reflect on science and spirituality and how those intersect for you. Share with us so I can share with other people if you want to uplift your thoughts in that way. And just go forth knowing that love is embodied around you and you are quite loved.